Can everybody hear me? Everyone can hear me. Welcome, guys. Welcome to this afternoon's session on strengthening the capacity of women's enterprises by developing the right ecosystem for women-owned businesses. Now, before I get started, I've been asked to tell you that in the front page of your program, you have the password for that Wi-Fi here, just in case some of you are missing it and would like to tweet. My name is Tricia de Borgrav. I'm a writer and Senior Associate of GWL, Strategic Partnering and Philanthropy. Women today are generating more of their own wealth than ever before. According to Goldman Sachs, women in the States are responsible for $11 trillion worth of assets. That's 39% of total investable assets in the US. In the UK, more than half of its millionaires will be female by 2025. That's according to the Center for Economics and Business Research. But that's women as decision makers, not just influencers. And that right now means that women worldwide have become an important client base for wealth managers. Again, no longer a topic of interest, but of commercial relevance, if you like. A lot of this wealth, however, is generated by widows, by divorcees, and by family inheritance. That's not to say that women are not actually really contributing to the legacy of their spouses or their families or their parents. But it does point to a real lack of that critical mass of self-made women succeeding in business. And wealth disparity, racial discrimination, lack of access to capital and education, and inadequate networks are continuing to be barriers for women entrepreneurs. And in this world of digital and social disruption, ecosystems are vital if new forms of work are to thrive. And equally in a world that is restless now with that encroachment of automation, with self-correcting algorithms, and which in the advancement of women is still stubbornly lagging, if not sometimes actually falling behind, gender bias continues to be a real issue. Despite the evidence that women-owned businesses are as successful, if not more, than male-owned ones, despite the growing popularity of women in business, despite the enabling tools of tech, and some organizations, women entrepreneurs are still struggling. So what gives? What should this environment look like for that capacity to be really ramped up for millions of women to become the business leaders of today and tomorrow? So, to dive a little deeper and dig a little further, I'm delighted to welcome our panel of speakers. I hope Roya is also going to join us at some point. We'll see if that happens. Welcome to Wendy Telecki. Wendy is the head of the Secretariat for the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative. That's also known as WEFI. This is a fund for the economic empowerment of women in developing countries. It was established off the heels of the G20 summit in 2017. It's a private-public collaborative initiative that is being administered by the World Bank Group. Welcome. Welcome, Michael Denham. Michael is the President and CEO, yes, of BDC Canada. That's the one and only bank in Canada that is wholeheartedly committed to entrepreneurs. And welcome to Ram Jambunathan. Ram is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director, I think, yeah, of the SAP-IO Fund. And again, this is a fund that acts as an incubator for entrepreneurs in early stage startups, especially in software. Now, have we got Roya with us or not? No one knows if she's on screen. Okay. I'm not going to introduce Roya yet. Hopefully somebody will tell me when she's here. Aha, somebody's going, right. Well, let's just start off with you, Wendy. So the highest number of female entrepreneurs in developing countries can be seen in sub-Saharan Africa. It stands today at 27% of the female population are women entrepreneurs. And they are women, more than men, are choosing to become entrepreneurs in all kinds of different areas. In areas such as agribusiness and design and tech and what else? All sorts of, I mean, there's also more women-orientated, more traditional women-orientated sectors. The one thing is that these entrepreneurial activities tend to remain quite small as businesses, and they have real trouble in growth. basically. Why is it so difficult for women in Africa to grow their businesses? And if you at WeFi can identify those root causes, which I presume through the World Bank you do, can you provide not just startup capital, but also essentially help them scale?
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time. We at the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative are focused on women entrepreneurs in emerging markets. So we work globally on the challenges that women face as they try to start up and run their businesses. And indeed, across the world, women are very active in entrepreneurship, but they're very stunted, obviously, from being able to grow their businesses successfully for a variety of reasons. In Africa, this is particularly the case. One of the things we see in Africa is there's a much greater appetite for entrepreneurship. Africa ranks the highest in terms of people who see entrepreneurship as a positive career path, and women who are taking an entrepreneurial path compared to men. In many countries across Africa, more women are entrepreneurs than men are. And one of the really important distinguishing factors for entrepreneurs is whether they're opportunity entrepreneurs or necessity entrepreneurs. So of course, in countries where there's a lot of poverty, you do see a lot of necessity entrepreneurs. Those are people who would take another job, who would do something else. Their dream is not to become an entrepreneur, but they are entrepreneurs because that's how they need to make ends meet. And then there are opportunity entrepreneurs who are looking for that growth opportunity, looking to fulfill some dream that they have or some goal that they have for them and their families.
Are you focused on both sectors then?
So we support women entrepreneurs around the globe equally, but we're also looking for those transformational entrepreneurs that have a growth potential. So that's very important to us because we want to see the growth and the employment generation that they can create. And what we see when you look at women SMEs, women-owned SMEs, is that generally they're much, much smaller than men on average, male-owned businesses. And they're in sectors that do not have as much value addition, so lower productivity sectors. And they're also clustered in sectors where many businesses are doing the same thing. So margins shrink. Although what we also see is that when you find women who are in non-traditional sectors, in the construction business and technology, they do better than men. So they are more profitable. And this is particularly some research that we've done in Africa. We see that. So what is the challenge that we see for these women? I'm going to cite a colleague of mine who's coined a rubric of 5 C's, which are women lack capital, they lack contracts, they lack capabilities, community, and confidence. And those are the things that we see consistently, not only in Africa, South Asia, MENA, Middle East, North Africa, Asia, and LAC. We see it everywhere. And what do we mean by that? Women have, on the capital side, much less access to debt capital. They have much less access to equity capital. So we see, from the global databases on venture capital, they're only at 17% if you count all firms that have a woman founder, but they're only 2% if you count women that are companies that are only founded by women. So this is a very stark problem on the equity side, on the debt side. And one of the reasons on the debt side in particular is we see women don't have the assets for collateral. So we need to find solutions for that. Fintech, insurance, other kinds of finance also we're seeing the same kinds of weaknesses. On the contract side, we've already heard the number 1 to 2% of multilateral and government contracts go to women-owned businesses. Same problems. That's very acute in the countries we're in. All of these problems become more acute the poorer the countries are.
Can you act as, can your fund act as a sort of catalytic for that sort of thing? If you, almost like you're the philanthropic, part of it, and then other people can join in.
Absolutely. So what we do is we have 14 donors. We have $350 million to deploy through the multilateral development banks to work on these challenges. And we see, what we try to do is in each case, we take an ecosystem approach. So if we're trying to solve a problem, we're trying to solve it through finance, through contracts, through capabilities, through community and confidence. And what that means is when one of the multilateral development banks that's implementing projects under WEFI goes into a country, they'll address these issues systematically. We work with the private sector, so we'll work with banks, training banks to figure out how to lend to women. We have very comprehensive programs. I think most of the multilateral development banks are very active in that area. We look at asset-backed lending so that women who don't have assets can borrow against movable collateral that they may have. That requires us to work with governments on secured collateral registries and other forms like that. We'll work with the equity space, incubators, accelerators, VC, private equity, trying to help them with gender lens investing, and also to get diversity in their management teams of funds, because what we found is more diverse management teams on funds have better returns, and they also are more likely to invest in women. So on the capital side, we do that. We do a lot of work on the contract side, on value chain financing. So we'll work with corporates in countries to help them build out their supplier base of women. There's work happening on the tourism sector in several countries, for example. Agribusiness, bringing more women into agribusiness value chains and trying to train women on standards. We heard about standards earlier, so that's very important. So we do that kind of work as well.
Sort of the ecosystem of scaling as well. Let me just turn to Michael now and come slightly closer to home. So 27% of the female population in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, are women entrepreneurs. In Western economies, more mature economies, that figure can actually go right down to about 5%. And in the UK, closer even still to home, 85% of bank lending goes to finance, insurance, and real estate, and only 2 to 3% goes to those SMEs. So those small to medium-sized enterprises, which are often the cradle of women's businesses. And this then puts a huge amount of over-reliance, if you like, on trying to find capital elsewhere, which then we bring in the venture capital, government grants, Kickstarter campaigns, money under the sofa. It's not a particularly conducive environment for women to access that capital. Do you think that what we call that traditional high street bank needs to have some sort of structural reform in their banking practices, especially in lending? Should they align themselves a little bit more with a development bank in terms of greater, longer extension, greater adjustment to lending, so that you're looking at that long term and always going back to that essential need for second round financing? What are you doing at BDC that perhaps normal banks should be doing?
So let me, it's a good question, just to position BDC for folks. I don't want to presuppose that what we're doing in Canada is directly relevant for you, but I'll describe what we're doing in Canada, Tricia, to answer your question, and then you can just gauge whether it's relevant for what you're living and breathing. But we're a crown corporation, which means we have one shareholder, that's the government, but we function independently. We have an obligation to be sustainable financially, so returns are kind of high single digits ROE, but we exist for a reason. We have a mandate, and that mandate is to support entrepreneurs in Canada. So we're a commercial lender. We have about a $30 billion lending book, and we're also Canada's largest venture capital investor. So maybe after Ram's comments on VC, I'll have some comments on VC. I'll talk about more a commercial lending business to get at your question, Tricia. So it's important for us, part of our mandate is to make sure that all Canadian entrepreneurs have access to the financing they need to start their businesses and scale them up. So making sure that all demographics. Do you want me to cut off for a bit?
No.
Okay.
Roy is there. Welcome, Roy. We're just in the middle of discussion here. I'll come to you in a second. Go ahead.
So all demographics are relevant. And we had a particular look at our lending to women entrepreneurs a couple of years ago. That was the genesis for our strategies. And what we found is that half the population in Canada is women. 16% of entrepreneurs in Canada are women. And we knew we needed to change that. And our government is committed to change it. The government's directed over $2 billion of resources to kind of move the needle. And we'd like to get that number in the near term up to 30% of all Canadian entrepreneurs being women. So our angle in this was to take a very, very close look at our lending practices. We needed to make sure that we weren't part of the problem. We needed to make sure that we weren't disproportionately disapproving loans for women entrepreneurs versus approving them. And thankfully, we kind of did the analysis and we found that marginally, we're more likely to approve a loan to a woman entrepreneur than we are to a male entrepreneur. And what we found was because women entrepreneurs, even in Canada, they lead smaller businesses, on average, to 50% of the size of men-led businesses, and on average had 8 employees rather than 12, so they're very small. What we found, and the key lever we're focused on now, it's, again, not changing our approach to lending, but it's much more finding a way to encourage women entrepreneurs to approach not just us, but other commercial banks for loans. So there's a financial literacy aspect to it, there's a supply chain connection aspect to it, there's a networking aspect to it, so that women have the confidence, literacy, the networks, the reason to come to us for more lending. And that excites us because through those loans, they can grow their business and become much more sustainable, much more attractive over time. So I can come back to the VC angle later, but that's been our experience
also,
around lending.
I mean, I presume that you need some sort of political will to push this forward as well. It's not a central bank of any sort. It is a private bank. But do you feel that to have the government on board, to have that as almost a sort of national requirement to make, Canada 50-50, does that help you? Does that?
It helps us directly because, again, our shareholder is the government. So that's a direct line from government policy to our priorities. But at the same time, I look at the main chartered banks in Canada. These are the large global institutions. They're also equally committed to moving the needle on this, which I think comes from their values, also comes from just the zeitgeist in the country right now, where it's so important to all aspects of the country. So I think, the journey, we're just starting the journey. There's a long, long way to go, but I've been quite heartened with the level of engagement on the part of the entire financial sector to enhance accessibility to women-led entrepreneurs for their financing.
So we have Canada. And Ram, I wanted to turn to you and just talk about ecosystems, particularly back in the day of the 80s and 90s. There was a real concerted push in the US to really create these networking opportunities for women entrepreneurs. And there was all sorts of things. I can't remember what they are, but there was the Women's Business Development Center. There was National Association of Women's Business Owners, count me in. There was the Women Business Ownership Act of '88. So all these efforts were to get women-owned businesses to be able to compete with government contracts. But all these efforts never became greater than the sum of their parts, and women still languish compared to men entrepreneurs. So my question to you is, hopefully we're not in that same environment. What have we learned from past efforts at trying to create these networking opportunities and ecosystems? And I'm going to throw another factor in there, which is according to media finance specialists, Bloomberg and so on, 2/3 of the women, of self-made women billionaires in the world are Chinese. So what can we learn from our own past efforts, and what is China doing that perhaps we're not?
That's a complex, multi-part question, but I'll take a shot at to answer that. I think in the first side, you asked a question around, what have we learned from past efforts, for example, and I think, you mentioned we actually started some things around networking. We focused also on the demand side when it comes to procurement. But I think what's consistently petered out is on the supply and the capital side, like being able to fund these investors. And for a variety of reasons, I think there's discussion, as Wendy mentioned, about who's providing the funding. There's a lot of pattern matching there. So men tend to fund men, as has turned out, even though if we talk about diverse teams being able to drive higher returns, but until you've experienced those higher returns, you're unlikely to move in that direction. It's all kind of hypothesis or theoretical until you actually experience it, right? So there's that event at play, or that process that's happening, and unfortunately it's taking some time to unfold. There's also the matter of the women's teams themselves being smaller because as a function. They may be more profitable, but as I've seen firsthand, women founded businesses have to run leaner because they don't have the capital. So they actually end up being more profitable, or can be more profitable, but that's a function of constraints, right? I'm not saying that they would have run any more profitable if they would have grown, or if they would have gotten more capital, but they probably would have had the opportunity at least to grow faster and become reach a type of capitalization that a traditional demographic like a male-founded business would have achieved. And then, on that note, if I talk to a female entrepreneur and I say and make the remark that women drive superior returns, and she'll say, "Yeah, you'll always get superior returns if you can invest at half the value." right? So you're going to get twice the return versus somebody else. So there's a lot of dynamics at play that feed into that. But at the end of the day, I would say, what we've learned is that, against all odds, because there are a lot of factors challenging female entrepreneurs, they are still able to succeed and overcome obstacles if you give them a chance, right? And so our objective of what we're doing at SAPIO, which we can talk about a little bit after the second part of the question, is really about giving more entrepreneurs, especially in the B2B tech, B2B software space, that opportunity.
What's China doing?
Yeah, so when it comes to China, I happen to have just been there last week at the World Economic Forum. So you mentioned more than half the world's female billionaires are from China, and I think more than half the startups since 2014 that have been founded in China have had a female founder. I think they've just been if you look at the Chinese society and across the different strata when it comes to different occupations, they seem to be very, they haven't gone to the selection, so to speak, that this is for men or this is for women or something like that. So if you see even noticing in the airports who is policing, it's equal numbers of men and women. If you see who's at different occupations in different areas, it's equal numbers of men and women. That may be a little bit different at the government. I was thinking about this. I don't know at the top levels of government whether that's still reflected, but I think they've just done a much better job of negotiating the gender dynamics there, where they've been very encouraging of women in sciences, in technology, in industry to pursue those opportunities and to back those opportunities. I think they've seen part of it is also fueled by economic growth, rising tide lifting all boats. So, there was a natural force at play there as well, which maybe if the growth were to moderate as well, those numbers may change a little bit.
And are we missing, especially in, I think, developed economies, are we missing some sort of financial education? I feel that throughout school and going into university, that economics, I'm not going to burst anybody's bubble here, but economics is not rocket science if you are taught subjects that have that as a basis. I mean, anything underlying whatever subject you do at school has an economic side to it. And it seems like there's always this, Credit Suisse came up with this research, which I think we all know, that we know that women are more risk averse than men for a multitude of reasons that actually some of these breakouts have gone into. They demonstrate less investment knowledge and feel less confident when making investment choices. That doesn't, that shouldn't be. I mean, I think if you do have not just business school, but financial education generally, do you not think that will open up that sense of welcoming, yourself into that space to say, I can do this as well?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question that comes to your risk tolerance is going to be a function of the number of opportunities you believe you have. And so if you don't believe you have that many at-bats, you're probably going to not swing for the fences, right? Because it's going to be harder to recover. So I think that's one thing. And then secondly, probably there's some social conditioning happening as well at the same time, where if I was remarking to somebody the other day about growing up in school, I think it's when we're in China, when I was in China, where boys are pushed into, say, industrial arts, and girls are pushed into home economics, right? At least that was the dynamic in the 80s growing up in the US. So I think there is some social conditioning that's happening earlier that's saying, oh, this is, and we see this prevailing in the STEM activities as well, where there's big gender gaps, or where women are shunted to versus where men are encouraged to go. Right. So those factors, I think, all drive that.
Something else on the point of training. I mean, we've seen a lot of training programs in developing countries that don't work very well. You don't see a measurable difference in the growth of the entrepreneurs, especially women, that are very traditional. How to write a financial statement, how to write a business plan, these kinds of things. The emerging evidence is that for women, it's more the teaching about how to be an entrepreneur, how to think forward thinking, how to think about scenarios, how to think about where your network, where your resources come from the network. and how to be agile in terms of, you know, your plans versus the future. So it has to incorporate that kind of training as well, which is where the confidence comes in to deal with the myriad problems that you face as an entrepreneur, especially in those markets.
Yeah. Perhaps more with hybrid teaching in schools now, we will have more of that scenario building. I know.
Just to finish this up,
Yes.
one of the parts of our program was we conducted 12, we called them boot camps, entrepreneur boot camps for women entrepreneurs across the country. Had 1,000 over the course of a number of months. And it was all about the entrepreneurial skills. It was about the networking. It was about the peer support. But it was designed to address the point you just made vis-a-vis Credit Suisse in terms of it shouldn't be the way you described. No. And it's not going to be the way you described forever. And we saw demonstration of that through these sessions.
That's great. Roya, welcome. I want to welcome everybody to Roya Mahbub. She is the founder and CEO of the Afghan Citadel Software Company. This is a company based in Herat in Afghanistan, which provides software for government ministries, I think, international organizations and universities in Afghanistan. So welcome, Roya. And since we have you here, can you hear me? Can we hear Roya? No. So you can hear us, but we can't hear you yet.
Hi.
Oh, hello. Hello. Great. Welcome, Roya. So you were one of the first CEOs of an IT company in Afghanistan. This is a country where it's still relatively rare, I would say, for women to work outside the home. And so since we have you here, could you give us, first of all, your insight, your sort of exclusive perspective on a country like Afghanistan and the relationship to women entrepreneurs? And because I think for most of us, it remains a bit of an enigma. And secondly, how did you personally make it? Apart from, which I say to every woman entrepreneur anywhere, me, myself, I, apart from you and your efforts as a person, what were the professional networks and access to capital that you were able to tap into to become such a successful entrepreneur?
First of all, I would like to say hi to everybody and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this panel virtually. In Afghanistan, women's work always was different from urban to the rural areas. In most of the rural families, women have been always involved from centuries with agriculture and handicraft businesses. And many of the women still continue to providing even some of the product through the animals and variety animals and make the income for the families. But for the cities and urban areas, from 2 decades, especially the last 2 decades after the Taliban fell, there was lots of the other opportunity available for the women that they could go to either start their startups or companies in infrastructure as a construction company to technology company to medias and production and many other industries that they were very involved. But there are still lots of the challenges available for women, as many of other panelists also mentioned. Access to capital is the biggest challenges for many of the women. If they are not be part of the rich family or not political families, they won't have easily access to the finance, and it's the biggest challenges for them. And then second, many of these women who come to start a business, they have a problem of the education that many of them, they don't know how to they don't have the entrepreneur skills or the training, so they just started a business because of the lack of the jobs. There is no job, or there are problem of the poverty, and they wanted to find another ways of the income for their families. And for Afghans, female, especially the businesswomen, it's not a matter of having access to capital or training. It's also a matter of how to survive or grow their business, but it's more about how to survive their businesses. Many of them, when they started the startups or they get in a contract from the governments, because of the high rate of the corruptions in the governments, legally the women can get the contracts, but the problem is that how they can get paid. They have to put a lot of their times to implement the projects, but the payment is not always on time, and sometimes take years to get paid for your first project. And that's make the companies, especially women, the women who own the company, to not be able to get many more contracts, and they have to stop it, because they will also get the most of the monies that they get for the contracts. They get a loan, and they have to give the monies to the people who they borrow from them. So these are all those challenges that remain. And of course, we are in a country that the war exists and the insecurity exists, and a lot of the cultural barrier also limited the women's movement in daily life and especially in the professional lives.
And how did you, forgive me for interrupting, so how did you do it?
Well, when I started the business in 2010, of course, there were very few female in the businesses, but especially in tech, there was very less women being seen as a tech woman. And for me, at the time, we just wanted to be graduated from computer science, and we wanted to start a company because we wanted to hire the most of these women who graduated from this field, and we're bringing our technologies to the market. But of course, for me, what's difficult is access to the finance was my main challenges, and the second is that it was very male dominated, and many of the men didn't want to give me contracts, or if we get contracts, they didn't want to pay us on time. But that's bringing me to lots of the struggle that I had. It's bringing me to realizing that the social media can give the women in conservative countries a digital voice. And this digitalization actually can connect them with other part of the world and change their world, and that allowing to live beyond of the border of a country that they always know. And for me, then I saw a friend of mine send me an invitation to LinkedIn. And I was registered myself, and I found out I can easily use the LinkedIn to find the clients, being inside of Afghanistan or outside of Afghanistan. And I became a digital entrepreneur, and I found lots of the clients actually, even inside of around of Afghanistan, but also mostly from outside. And I found my first investor for my company through LinkedIn. He was Italian American, live in New York, and he funded me through the LinkedIn, and he invested in my company. And that was changed lots of things for me. And I found out that there is a way that we have to help the other women to find out how they can build a network.
So
because
sorry, again, Roya, you're experimenting now with Bitcoin, which I think is fascinating in itself, because it acts almost as a currency for those women who just can't access that capital that they need. Can we get your thoughts on what you think about Facebook's plans to roll out the cryptocurrency Libra? They're trying to do this next year, I think. And as much as we've all read about it, it's meant to have a sort of stable value. It's meant to circulate alongside normal currencies, which often in developing countries can be very weak and fluctuate a lot. It's meant to kind of be rolled out to all those millions of people who don't have bank accounts or access to money transfers, with the idea of eventually creating sort of investing services, all sorts of other things. I mean, aside from the controversies of Facebook, the actual, or is this still coming from a bad apple factory? I'm not sure. But what do you see this as having some sort of impact on women entrepreneurs throughout the world?
Definitely. I think that technology behind of cryptocurrency is a powerful transformative tools for empowering economics, lives of the women across of the global. And it's looking the lots of the blockchains technology that today it's working to helping the women in the country. Like the women's having access to the bank, 42% of the women globally still lack access to the banking service. So I think that would be very helpful for them. For the legal contracts, it would help many of the women who owns the lands. 20% at least of the lands the woman owns the lands in the world that they needed to put it in the digital in a blockchain layer that to enable them to protect their property ownerships, and as well as also for lots of the women in the world, and especially men as well, they don't have the ID entity that which also help them to have that. And in terms of the blockchain, I think that we have a lot of STEAM. We have less percentage of the women to have been in STEAM jobs, but blockchain is new, and I think that it still isn't very male dominated, but I think that is a best place for the women to get involved today, to building in a company there or becoming a coder in the blockchains, and hopefully we'll have more women in the future that working with a blockchain and changing the nation. tech.
Thank you. That's great. Time-wise, I'd love to open this up now to the audience. If anybody has any questions, and keep them succinct. If you have comments, everybody here is a contributor, so just try and keep them succinct. Raise your hand, I'll find you. Give your name and affiliation, which would be wonderful. Lady here in the shawl, just here in the front with glasses. The lady right here, and then afterwards, next to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Demet. My name is Demet. I'm from EY, Ernst & Young, and I'm working. I'm a sponsor lead also at EY for the women entrepreneurship that we are doing. So access to finance is one of the barriers and the challenges for women entrepreneurship. We are all aware of that, and thanks to what you're doing over there. My critical question is, how do you measure what you're doing is successful against your stakeholders?
That's a good question. Does anybody want to take that? Michael?
Sure. Well, these are fairly crude measures that will refine over time, but we're looking at a lot of just quantitative measures. So how many women are we lending to? What's the collective revenues of those businesses? What's the loan approval rates for women? What's the kind of sign-up rate and participation in the networking educational sessions we're offering? So they're more kind of input measures than output measures right now, but our hope is if we get just more activity underway, it'll lead to positive output. So fairly crude right now, and input rather than output, but at least it'll give us a way to calibrate that we're getting traction.
Do you want to add to that?
I'll just take a couple minutes. So for WeFi, we have a results framework. We look at the number of women that we're providing with financial services and other financial services. Right now, with the funding that we've allocated, we expect to reach at least 114,000 women. We also look at leverage because we have 350 million. Our goal was to have $1 billion crowded into this. Right now, our projection is we'll crowd in $2.6 billion for women from public sector sources and private sector sources. We also look at jobs, and then we also have a program of research so that we can actually look at the deeper impacts of some of the projects and get insights into what really works in terms of the programming and how it has a benefit for the women in their households, their families, and in their places of business.
Lady there?
This point of leverage is extremely important because when you have the scale of problem we're dealing with, scale of challenge we're dealing with is so big, there's a limit to what governments, multilateral or not, can do. So unless these programs are designed to create the leverage like Wendy described, they're not going to succeed. So it's really encouraging to hear about that level of leverage associated with this program. It's a big deal.
We've got to get that private sector, public functioning
You're bringing capital
properly.
markets, you're bringing in corporate investments, banking investments, so a lot of others.
To make them all work together, which is a little bit still stiff in its workings. The lady there with the glasses?
Hello, this is Yeşim. I'm from Turkey, the Women Entrepreneurs Association of Turkey, KAGİDER, and we are working for women, supporting women entrepreneurs in Turkey, and we were the first organization to run W20 back in 2015. Just one food for thought. We say risk-averse for women. Can we say risk-aware instead of risk-averse to make it more positive?
It's called responsibility.
Thank you. But my question is, I know that all the three organizations, they are very supportive for women entrepreneurship globally. And yes, one of the biggest obstacles is the access to finance. But we know that secondly, maybe their equal access to markets is very important as well. So as the biggest lenders to women entrepreneurs, does your organizations, companies, do you buy from women, or do you keep the track of the women suppliers that you are buying from?
Yes, good question. Can I just hold that one, and then I'm going to ask the lady at the back there. Yeah, we'll just do a few questions at the same time.
Sure, and my question is actually related to her, so it's good. My name is Ruby Alcantara. I am an advisor to Oceano Capital, which is an FCA-regulated impact investment firm. I also have my own company in Canada. It's called Supiva, known for supporting the divas, and we support women entrepreneurship in emerging markets. My question is actually to to Wendy more so, but I think all of you can answer this: due diligence. And we're talking about access to finance. Some of the entrepreneurs that I support really struggle, and especially when we're working in the impact investment space, the due diligence process can be quite fun. And especially if you're supporting entrepreneurs. One of my clients, for example, is a woman who is in her, I'm not going to say her age, but essentially her children are in their late 20s, early 30s. She has just now started her own business, and I'm trying to walk her through the due diligence process that investors are expecting for, and she's just looking at this like, oh my gosh. So my work is mainly focused on Africa, and it was great that you were talking about the African side. So I'm curious in terms of how do you, I don't want to use the word making easier, because I know due diligence should never be quote unquote easy, but how do you help entrepreneurs, or how can we support entrepreneurs, and how can we ensure that the due diligence process is thorough, yet also not so intimidating for women entrepreneurs who are trying to access this finance? Because I think there is finance. The problem is
it's how to access it.
You know, there's lots of finance. It's
There's
there.
lots of it.
It's just tapping into it.
All right, so should we, just those two questions, then we'll go back to so, yes. What's that enabling environment
I'll
looking
take
like?
a stab at the first question, and then maybe add an opinion on the second one. So on the first one with SAPIO, I think the question was, you know, how are we absorbing the innovations or measuring, like from a procurement standpoint? And what we do at IO is two things. Not only do we invest in startups, we also run a global network of equity-free accelerators. So really intense programs to help founders who or entrepreneurs who have now built a product and started to get some traction, really help them scale. And our value, as for those of you who don't know, SAP is the largest enterprise software application company globally. We have 420,000 customers. We're much more effective as a channel for entrepreneurs than as a destination for entrepreneurs as a consumer. So we measure our success in how many of our customers can absorb those innovations, because that's one way not only to help that business grow, but grow quickly so that they can attract the next round of funding or venture capital and so on. So we measure ourselves on the number of startups that we're working with, but also on the amount of customers that they're able to win.
Giving them access to those markets.
Yes, and exactly. And as we're a global company, and our customers tend to be large global companies as well, they, you know, are fairly invariant as to where those innovations come from, as long as it helps them win.
What's your ratio of women entrepreneurs then?
This year, I think we have 60% of the startups that we have supported are founded or led by women entrepreneurs.
That's great.
So it's I think we're trending in the right direction. But what I want to emphasize here is that before I move on to the second question, my comment on the capital access is that we actually look for startups that meet a certain threshold. So I want to emphasize that we are working with great startups that happen to be founded by women, not female-founded startups, because the moment we've discovered it, we don't want people to think we're working with the startup because it's a woman-founded startup. We're working with this founder because they've built a great business. They happen to be a woman, right? And they just haven't had the right opportunities, and we're going to give them opportunities because our customers, you know, are invariant. They want a great product, and if we can bring that great product, no matter who it's sourced from, they're happy, right? On the second piece, I just want to say we're starting to see finance has to go through its own, I think, disruption and transformation. So, you know, in the Bay Area, for example, and I think this can then be replicated in other markets. You're seeing a decoupling when you have like startups like Brex, for example, providing startup funding, but decoupling the founder's personal, like not making the founder personally liable if the startup goes under. So that's a big problem for startups of either gender, but especially taxes women, like because they have less capital or less assets to fall back on. I think as we see more interesting initiatives like that come where founders are not like liable for what happens to if they're able to separate themselves from the business, you'll see a new kind of a step function in terms of economic activity because of the leverage that's being enabled.
Right. Michael, did you want to come in on that?
I think Wendy should answer the question.
Oh, Wendy.
Yes, so on the first question about World Bank, well, so WeFi is housed at the World Bank. It's owned by the 14 donor countries. But I can speak a little bit about World Bank because the World Bank has gone through an extensive review of its own gender policies, and it includes EDGE certification. So trying to make sure that every element of our business has the proper gender perspective, and one of those is procurement. So we have been doing a lot of work recently in trying to expand women's access through our procurement processes, which are also not easy. I mean, talking about due diligence, it's not easy to come through World Bank procurement, but that's been happening at headquarters, and now we're starting to roll that out throughout our 120 offices around the world, so that we're also procuring from women in the markets that we serve. Right. So that is an important initiative that we have going on, and our very large procurement team is very engaged and invested in doing this. Just on due diligence, I think you said also, like, we wouldn't wish our due diligence process on most entrepreneurs. Like, that would be really horrible. So we are the biggest investor in funds in emerging markets in the world. So we look for our funds to do most of those investments. I mean, for us to do an investment under 10 million is unusual. That's on the IFC side. On the bank side, they don't do direct investments in the private sector. But one of the things we do is training for fund managers, and I think all of the MDBs that are part of, or at least several of the MDBs that are part of WeFi do gender lens training. So where we do work with funds to try to train them on how to ensure that they're doing things in an equitable fashion as they go out and look for women entrepreneurs.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, the lady there, she's in the middle, she's got a stripy top. Brown and black top. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Marie Morrison. I'm a UK delegate and I'm a female entrepreneur of a SME e-commerce business based in Scotland. Also working with Carrie here on this Women in Scotland group, which we're trying to look into women's centres to replicate the US and Canada. So I have so many questions, but I'll try and abbreviate to the shortest ones. It touches what we mentioned here in Afghanistan. What was mentioned was the cash flow is a big issue for SMEs and for female entrepreneurs, and especially if you're looking at procurement and trying to win bigger procurement contracts or contracts with big firms, what's being done to address the fact that some people pay on 120 days out and you're unlikely to get the cash even in 120 days, and then also take an admin fee of up to 4% sometimes off what gets paid into your account for processing the payment. My other part of that is with WeFi, have they considered looking into blockchain technology for the contracts that are being held with doing something like public procurement or government contracts, and how that could help? And finally, it was what was being done to build onto platforms like we spoke about in India with the digital, or the perhaps new East African community that's being built up. Is anything being done to build onto something of an existing platform with an e-commerce platform that could perhaps compete against the Amazons before they get in there and get up to 20% off every transaction?
Roya, do you want to come in on any of these questions? Because up to you. Otherwise, I'll turn to the panel here.
I didn't get the questions. If you
can you not hear us?
I can hear you. I mean, I wanted to know that what was the specific questions about the blockchain, because, well, we are doing right now working on a platform to help the small and medium-sized business women owner to have access to finance and also networking, and also they can have an opportunity to do have a training. Increasing their skills. It's a very early stage. It's we are still discussing with a couple of other partners to joining us and helping the women in developing countries, because of based on our experience that we had in Afghanistan. I saw that this challenges with many other women, not only in Afghanistan but many of the women in South Asia, also in Africa, and as well South America, that we needed to working on initiatives that it's not only giving the loan or access to capital, but also helping them that they can grow their business to the next level.
So it's in certain economies, particularly emerging economies or less developed economies, then blockchain seems to be a lot of hope is being placed on that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
The first part of the question
Yes.
on cash flow management, which is a
Yes.
huge issue, right? The two things that we suggest for our clients is firstly, pick your customers properly. Because there are some customers that just 90, 100, 120 days, if you're lucky, just don't bother selling to them. And then second is, we're also focused on filling gaps in the financial marketplace in Canada. We have a lot of gaps. And we've just, so purchase order financing is something we've done. And we found, again, to your point, it was a key enabler to help especially very small companies get going, because that period, even if it's kind of 30, 60 days when you're just starting, that's a long time to manage the cash. And with the purchase order financing, it bridges part of that.
Of course, it's often hard, I would say, to if you're getting off the ground and you have those customers where the payment cycles are long, it's hard to fire them, right, effectively, because they may be your only customers until you can grow the business to a point where you can effectively churn those customers out. You're kind of stuck, right? And then there are options like receivables financing, for example, but that's actually kind of a high interest rate that you're using to fund your business. Right. So I think opportunities that technology-enabled solutions like blockchain can offer, where then you effectively can democratize lending and amortize risk across a broader network of individuals, actually can be quite compelling. And so it'll be interesting to see how the next few years unfolds for this particular segment.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Lady there? Oh, of course, and yes. Have you got, excuse me one sec, I'll take the lady here. I'd forgotten that you were there. There's the mic.
Hello, Mimi Ajibade from SOAS and Chatham House. I actually wanted to make just two comments. The first one is about China, and to say that we have to also remember that self-made in China is looking at the fact that just over 35 years ago, China was still a communist party. So there's no inherited wealth, so to speak, unless you're talking about 16, 25-year-olds at the moment. Most of them are still sort of self-made. The other thing is that China has scale. And I think it goes to your point, the panel's point earlier on, is that you have to look at the environment and the type of businesses women go into. China just naturally has scale. So a woman in China who sets up a business, she just needs to have an entrepreneurial spirit and go forth, and she will make something if she pursues it, because there is scale. And just finally, towards your point about payment, last year the government brought out a mandatory regulation that makes sure that companies that have, I think, about 200 or more employees, they have to declare every 6 months the number of days it takes for them to pay suppliers. So it's not for the SMEs, but if you are going for the likes of Tesco, etc., you can check online companies on the government.
Some mandatory measures really do help, unfortunately,
Yes.
but I think they do
Thank
help.
you.
Yes, one we're doing.
My first reaction is to the chair and the speakers over there. I think we need to separate digital currency and blockchain. We don't need a Facebook Libra to run the blockchain and do digital payments, so let's be sure. And
It'll be a subsidiary.
yeah, just very quickly, I would just say a word about Facebook. As a finance person, I think we have to think very careful about LTCM episode. And then I think Facebook is big enough to generate another LTCM if we are not careful. Okay, now talking about the blockchain payments, I just want to cite a number to say that the World Food Programme example is very big and loud. They have 100,000 refugees on their blockchain, and the payment is over $1 billion US every year, and they save in the region of $40,000 US every month on transaction fees. So that is very, very loud and clear. I think that's about all. I think about this not needing a digital currency to run on the blockchain, and the explanations about helping the unbanked. So 50% of the adults are unbanked. more in developing countries and even more for women.
Yeah.
And the blockchain will help with the identity creation and tracking if we get it right.
Thank you. Just one or two questions anymore? Because I'm going to ask the panelists. No? We're done. So sorry, go ahead. Gentleman here.
A very quick question. I think this is for Michael, but Wendy might have a view as well. I'm just curious whether you have any provisions for older entrepreneurs in your programs, or dare I say it, even perhaps any age restrictions that may make access to finance more difficult.
Well, that's a good question. You know, it's not something that we have our client base is actually spread across all demographics and age groups. We haven't dug into whether there are kind of particular gaps that need filling or barriers for older entrepreneurs. So we're active, but it's something, you know, that we probably should look into. So I'll probably just check into the data when I get back into the office.
Can I ask the panelists to give us just a couple of recommendations in the last 5 minutes that we can take this as a sort of baseline for tomorrow's discussions, because I think there'll be a workout. Yes, actually, I was waiting for you to put your hand up, but you did. If we could have the microphone up here.
Hi, I'm from Bangladesh. My name is Luna Shamshuddin. I'm from a tech sector, also telecom. And I've been working around the region for government of Bhutan and government of Nepal and others as well. And in fact, building the system for government procurement systems in these regions. What I have also been a chair of one of the largest banks in Bangladesh, you see, as 7 days ago I finished my tenure. What I wanted to say is that the government mandated every bank to at least have 25% of your total funding for SMEs. And out of that, 15% to women. That's a collateral-free loans that are given out. And Bangladesh, I've got data, so anybody wants to share, I can do that.
So going back to that question of structural reform, do we need that?
Yeah.
In those,
it was mandated. Otherwise, we needed an ecosystem that come up, and you know, it's 160 million people with only 55,000 square miles. So you know, they had to do something. So they've mandated, and we've got pretty good results from it. We've got an SME policy as well. And anybody else, I mean, I can share the data. It looks good around.
I mean,
we haven't done badly.
60% of UK jobs are SMEs, and yet they get 2 to 3%
last year
of the
was
financing.
7.89. Growth was 7.89%. This year we are anticipating 8.13.
Yeah.
So we've done something good somewhere.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, I will. So because I was at IFC before I moved over to WeFi, we're one of the biggest investors in banks around the world. And we have seen banks, you know, sometimes they need that push to get interested. I think a lot of them are also interested in the business case. So what we try to do is make sure it's clear to them what the business case is and make sure we pull the data out. And usually the business case is very strong for them to do more with women and women entrepreneurs. With an activist approach from the government side, the one thing I would say is harmful is interest rate caps, because there's where we see actually contraction and rationing of funding going to either women or SMEs or whatever. And we've seen that very, very clearly in recent years in a few markets that have put interest rate caps on. So I think, you know, putting some kind of aside in terms of the volume that's going or the numbers is one thing, but interest rates can be extremely distortionary and have unintended consequences.
Right. So I'm going to ask for a couple of recommendations. Can I start with you, Roya? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So give us a couple of recommendations of how we can bolster up that capacity for women entrepreneurs.
I think that one of the things that we can do is providing the earliest the training, the financial training. I think that is very important, plus the soft skills for the women that, especially in developing countries, when they know about administration, how to start a business, but leadership skills is very important, that they know how to do becoming good leader, or how negotiation skills is important. So we needed to provide them access to the network and market, which is necessary for the growth of their business.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on the conversation in the earlier panel with the discussion of boards and what moves the needle on these kinds of things. I think data is incredibly important, and this kind of competitive data whether it's for governments or for the private sector, is really critical. The more we can get reporting on what the private sector is doing, whether it's from the and public sector on the procurement side, what banks are doing in terms of their number. I mean, the more data you have like that and the more you can broadcast that, I think in this environment it really makes a difference. And it gives those of us who are in the market trying to push the different actors to do things a lot more levers to do that. So data in order to engage with the private sector, with the public sector, and if it's naming or shaming or whatever you want to do with the data just to get them to pay attention to it is really important.
Michael.
Two things. One is think about ways to get private sector leverage. So whether it's kind of by mandate or other approaches, that's going to be required to solve this issue. And then secondly, as Wendy set up initially, think broadly, because the financing is there, but it's the access to markets, it's, to Roy's point, it's the financial literacy, the learning, all those other things that need to go along with the financing that's going to represent success.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Ram.
So a few things. One, I love we spent a lot of time talking about entrepreneur training, but I think there has to be a lot of investor training that has to happen. I love that the World Bank is doing this. So putting that gender neutral lens on. So that's first. Second, I think there has to be focus on growth capital, right? So I think we're starting to see that there's while we talked about the figures, like 16-17% of the funding that's available today for entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs in the VC funding goes to female entrepreneurs in the U.S. versus out of the total. I think that number drops dramatically when you get to the growth stages. So there are some pockets of funding for women to get off the ground.
Why does it drop that dramatically?
I think it's because there's a lot of, I think there's a few things. One, there's some spreadsheet investing going on at the growth stages. So people are looking at what has your growth been, this is what it's going to be, this is what I'm going to base my investment on. Second, I think there's a lot of pattern matching, right? So you look at who's doing the investing as well. So those two things, that has to change. And then the third thing I would just add is that, we typically, focus on female entrepreneurs being around in areas like what we call femtech. So it's like consumer products or women's health or reproductive health, things like this. But there's a lot of innovation, a lot of great businesses being built by women in the B2B tech space, like in supply chain or in core finance or in sales and service. And those women we at least have the pleasure at SAP to see and back those type of hard tech startups. Right. And I think you will also see then a shift in terms of where entrepreneurs are going when they see the opportunities, because all entrepreneurs want is a chance.
Right, fantastic. All right, well, please help me in thanking this fantastic panel. Thank you, Roya. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Isra Al-Buti. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm a partner in Ernst & Young Saudi Arabia. EY firm has operated in the Middle East and North Africa region since 1923. So we understand the culture and the potential and the challenges happening in... My voice is clear or not? Okay, some of the people, they can't hear. Okay, I will hire. So good afternoon. My name is Isra Al-Buti. I'm partner in Ernst & Young Saudi Arabia. So Ernst & Young has been operating in the MENA region since 1923. So we understand the challenges as well as the potential in the region. So many women have taken the road actually at the moment to involve in the economic and business world and has increased significantly over the past 20 years. However, the road for gender parity remained long. For this, as EY, we have a lot of initiatives internally that help women, has a role to support women in the region to be a dynamic, innovation, and successful in the business and the society as well. Also, we contribute in other organizations such as the Global Women Leadership Forum and also the 30% Club, which is EY a funding chair. We are really looking forward for the G20 gonna be held in Saudi Arabia next year and believe that the future of economic growth is based on women inclusion, labor, finance, and digital entrepreneurship. We know that many view of the region in Saudi Arabia that the nation are uninterested in women rights, which is misconception. We have a different culture, different tradition, and different norms. That we are really different than the Western democracies and the Eastern regions. That's why I think if we can find a way to balance between the modern thinking and our culture, this will we could have a balance between the differences that we have. With me today, we have few distinguished experts in a different aspect in women economic empowerment across the region. I will introduce Haifa Al-Kilani. She's a founder and the chairwoman of the Arab International Women Forum. Farmi Dabi, chair of the Europe, Middle East, and Asia Practice, Norton Rose Fulbert. And also Salma, welcome again, Salma Rashid. She's head of delegation in the G20, and also she's represent Saudi Arabia in the Women 20 activities. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
I will start with Haifa, my question. Tell us about the role of women empowering and what your role actually doing in the region.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here at Chatham House. And the subject of this session is very much close to my heart and to my work. I'm a development economist. And when we talk about empowering women in the economy and in business and entrepreneurship, it is really not a question of feminism. It is an economic necessity. Simply, it is an ingredient, an important ingredient for growth. I'm proud to be the founder and chairman of the Arab International Women's Forum, which was established in London as a non-profit, a non-governmental organization 18 years ago to build those bridges between women in the Arab world and women in the international community. And our motto has been building bridges, building business. Building bridges of knowledge and understanding, but also moving to working together and learning from each other. Over these 18 years since we started, we are a development organization focusing on empowering women in the Arab region within a global context. We've conducted no less than 40 conferences and workshops moving between 25 countries. We're based in London, but we have covered the Arab region, Europe, the United States, and in all our conferences, we focus on key subjects that are pertinent to empowering women. We open the doors and the venues for women to learn from each other within the Arab region, because keep in mind, in the Arab region, we are 22 countries, so we're not all the same. So there's a lot of learning to be done between women within the region, but importantly, between the Arab region and internationally, as well as exchanging experiences, as well as doing business together. Our focus has been, of course, we wanted to see Arab women succeed in all sectors because they needed that support. We want to see more women in parliaments, in governments. We want to see more women in business, and we want to see women acknowledged in every respect. Even if they decide to be homemakers, that also is a very important role in building the next generation. So I'm happy to say our focus was mainly on women as engines of economic growth. Why? Because we have in the Middle East the lowest percentage of women's participation in the workforce, which is a huge loss for our region in terms of GDP, in terms of growth. We have in the region a very young population, and we are suffering from huge youth unemployment. Where are the jobs going to come from? They will only come from a vibrant, dynamic Arab sector, and this of businessmen and businesswomen working together. And this is where the jobs come from. So we've been pushing for women as engines of economic growth in the Arab world in all our agendas. How do we empower women? Not only through the conferences and the meetings, but all our conferences are addressed also by policymakers. The ministers are sitting with us in the room together with private sector, civil society, media, and we always invite 10% students because we want the young generation also to look at their role models. We have amazing role models, and we want to learn from them. We also create in our forum opportunities for mentorship, as well as for, we have a research center, because often there is a lot of misconception about women in the Arab world, and we're often asked to provide that information and the facts and the figures. Also the media. We always invite to our conferences the media, because a good story must be told and must go beyond the room where you are meeting. And we have amazing stories for women in the region. For the last 2 decades, there has been, we were talking when we started about windows of opportunity opening up for Arab women. Now we talk about doors open, really doors. You find governments are more inclined, more supportive, to have more women, empowered and in all sectors. The families are also getting used to, we do have lots of cultural and social barriers, not only in our community, in other communities in the world. One has to acknowledge these things. But you find there is more reception now. Girls are getting more educated. Girls are graduating from schools and universities in much bigger numbers than even their young men counterparts, and with outstanding results. And they're also entering STEM fields. So we have a good story emerging. But as I said, we still have 20% average of women's participation in the workforce in our region compared to the global average, which is extremely low. So we have still to keep working. We need to break down the impediments. We need to support more women entrepreneurs, and we need to support really them to not only empower themselves and their families, but importantly their communities. So this is why when we talk about our work in the Arab International Women's Forum, we recognize ourselves as a development organization. When you talk about women, economic empowerment, it is a development issue. It's not a women's issue. It is really for the whole community. And all our conferences, I must add, we present recommendations. We gather from this amazing, like today, you have an amazing guest list of speakers as well as participants. We gather recommendations and we put them forth to policymakers. In our 18 years, and I don't wish to drop names, we have developed excellent relations with the World Bank, the OECD, the EBRD. These are important. They're all also caring about supporting greater role for women's empowerment. They attend our conferences, they're with us. We also present recommendations to governments, to the League of Arab States, to the British government. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office has been a great supporter with us from the beginning, because they need to hear you. They need to see your recommendations, and they need to be aware of what you are doing. So it's a lot of work. There is a lot of things, good things happening in the region. The important thing is to maintain the momentum. And I think with more collaboration between private sector, public sector, and really working within the international community. We are not alone in the Arab world. We need to work within the region, but importantly with our partners in the global community. This is how we build those bridges, and this is how we empower women more to be effective agents of change and truly dynamic engines of growth.
So what are the initiatives that you are aware of, and how are you going to take it forward?
I mentioned some of our initiatives, but I'd like to mention here I'm going to give examples of 4 key initiatives that we are aware of that are taking place in the region to support women entrepreneurs. Number 1, we have to look at the lower level of the economy. You have the micro businesses. So we're very happy to see in the Middle East micro funds, like you have probably in Bangladesh. Of course, this is where the micro funds started. But we have micro funds, and this is very important to help women who are not able to access any commercial banking. And then this helps them, gives them the opportunity to start what we call cottage industries or simple industries and work from home, where it will be impossible for these women to work otherwise. One of the most successful examples is in Jordan. Another initiative that has been launched this year by the World Bank was at a key conference in Beirut, Lebanon in January this year, the Al-Mashriq Initiative on Women's Economic Empowerment, bringing together the prime ministers who all attended the meeting of Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. This is what they call Al-Mashriq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, with the funding already provided by the Canadian government of $10 million, focused only on supporting and giving access to finance to women in business in the 3 countries. And this is a great initiative. It comes top down. You have no less than the prime ministers who were there. Of course, many other ministers, business women leaders, associations of business women leaders, they were all in the room as this initiative was launched. Money was put up by the Canadian government, and already projects is being allocated to projects. A third initiative, which also was actually launched by the World Bank, I can talk about, called Empower Her. And this is in Al-Maghreb. It is in Tunisia and in Morocco. And this is focusing specifically on helping women in the rural sector. This is outstanding initiative where they are also bringing new technologies, bringing the young men, the young women, and look at the challenges of women working in the rural sectors. Both Morocco and Tunisia are rural economies. And the Empower Her initiative comes with technology, comes with networking, and comes with funding. And it has been very successful. It has won awards, actually, recently, one of the initiatives in Morocco. A fourth example of empowerment and support in terms of finance has been launched by the Lebanese government. The central bank, for the first time, interfered in the Lebanese economy. In what way? Positively, by telling the commercial banks that if you give loans to credible projects, of course, presented to you by young men and young Lebanese women who want to start tech businesses, we as a central bank guarantee the loans that you give. This has created such a hub in Lebanon. You find that many women, of course, young women who are setting up tech businesses, young men. Beirut is becoming a tech hub because of this initiative by the central bank. The banks wouldn't give the money by them on their own initiative. It required the central bank to come in, having seen the opportunity of young women interested in starting tech businesses, but they're not able to get the money. And the central bank went and told the commercial banks. Now Jordan wants to copy the example of Lebanon. So these are 4 good examples that I wanted to share with you today.
It's really fascinating to hear about these initiatives in the region. I will shift that conversation to Islamic finance. Some people find that really interesting. How could Islamic finance help women, help support women entrepreneurship, do you think, in the region?
Thank you, Esra. I've been working on Islamic finance projects, I guess, for the last 16 years in the Middle East primarily. And in many meetings that I go to, I tend to be the only woman who's present. And that isn't really in the spirit of Islamic finance, because as some of you know, the Prophet's wife was a merchant. And I tend to think that Islamic finance and female business and empowerment go hand in hand. So I would like to see many more Islamic financial institutions engage in a very direct way with Islamic finance. And at the moment, there is a lot more work to be done. So there have been attempts across the Middle East, sometimes from the Islamic banks, sometimes from the conventional banks. So there is sometimes a misunderstanding about what proportion of Islamic finance constitutes the economy in the Arab world. If you look at just the Gulf, it tends to be about 30% is Sharia compliant. The remaining 70% is made up of conventional banks and institutions. But 30%, and it is a growing proportion of those economies, and it is still significant on its own right. And there is real work that needs to be done by both the conventional institutions and the Islamic institutions to try and engage with women and to support them. We were speaking earlier about some of the initiatives that exist. We were talking about pink credit cards, which were one of the early initiatives that were started to try and encourage female customers into some of these organizations. And I think most women in the Middle East are sophisticated enough not to be swayed by a pink credit card to walk through the door. But there are really fundamental issues around, and I think you made the comment that the Middle East is made up of many countries and cultural norms vary enormously. So what works in Jordan may not work in Saudi Arabia. But in some countries, having a separate entrance, having people working in the bank who are women, who are able to engage with a female customer base, all of those things are vitally important. And there needs to be real pressure put on the Islamic financial institutions globally to make sure that their services are open and available to women as well as men. And I think at the moment, the pressure isn't there. It's great to see that the Islamic Development Bank is coordinating with other institutions on the Wi-Fi program. There's also another initiative that they have, which is called BRAVE, that is looking at women and supporting them in the most fragile states. So there is this leadership that is coming from the Islamic Development Bank. What I would love is for the IDB to get the Islamic financial institutions together in a room and say, what are we all going to do to promote women? And what are we going to do to finance them? And I think perhaps some of the proposals that you've already heard about from Haifa, but I think also on the earlier sessions, about direct government support or support from central banks to try and push these institutions, which are generally quite conservative, into accepting that women are generally pretty good customers and they are increasingly a significant part of the workforce and they need funding. I mean, in some parts of the world, women form such a tiny percentage of the banking customer base that there is a vast opportunity, if you look at it from a purely cynical perspective, in terms of what the banks can achieve if they reach out to this new growing, these are often young women entering the workforce, highly educated, highly motivated. They're a fantastic customer base for any institution in the world, let alone the kind of institution that from a Sharia perspective isn't banking on the basis of, I'll lend you £100 and you'll pay me 110 back at the end of the year, because that's interest-based banking, which is forbidden from an Islamic perspective. But an approach which is, you have a business, I will invest in your business, I will share in some of your profits. That's a fantastic and natural base for Islamic financial institutions to engage with their female customers in a way that is religiously acceptable and compliant. And for many men and women across the Muslim world, entering into a business arrangement which satisfies their religious concerns is vitally important. There's a lot of developmental evidence which suggests that, in some places in the world, people just will not go to a conventional bank and open a bank account because they're concerned that they're entering into an interest-based banking system which is against their religious principles. So they keep their money under the bed and don't they're not able to develop as quickly as they can do. So there's a lot for the Islamic finance industry to do. I think they have started. IDB's initiatives are really to be welcomed, but there is a lot more to be done.
Good that you mentioned that there is a lot of people, they don't have even a bank account. So how do you think the changes that needed for females particularly to be aware of these Islamic finance opportunities?
I think that I guess there are a number of things. So first of all, those banks have an obligation to go out and market and publicize the benefits of having an account. Sorry, keeping your money in a current account or literally keeping it at home is just such an unproductive thing to do. But again, we were speaking earlier that for a lot of women, there just isn't financial information and education out there. So perhaps people are not aware of what a negative impact this is having on their wealth. So I think there needs to be an educational piece. I think the banks need to come up with products and the practices. So, if your clients don't feel comfortable coming into the main bank, having a sort of slightly separate building with a separate room which has women bankers in it, that cannot be that difficult an item to provide, even if it's on 2 days a week, because that's all that you're able to do. So they have to engage, and they're only going to engage if they're incentivized. That's either through government diktat, because the governments tell the banks this is what we need in order to achieve the levels of economic growth and engagement that we want, or it comes from central banks saying, in order for you to have your licenses, you're going to have to demonstrate that you're doing this in order to show that there is real inclusivity in the services that you're offering. So I think we could sit and wait and wait for these very clever young women who are having comparable education to their brothers to come through the system, or we try and move things more quickly than that, and perhaps interact with the older women, some of whom don't have bank accounts. Saudi Arabia is unusual in the sense that it still has custodianship laws. I don't think it's the case in many other of the Arab countries. So if you're a woman, there are certain things that you can't do. So you like open a bank account or deal with finances without the support of a male relative. And I remember speaking to a friend who was divorced, whose father wasn't around anymore, who was saying, I have to take my 10-year-old son to the bank. This is absurd. Why do I have to do that? But that sort of thing will hopefully change, because it isn't the case in every Muslim country in the world, and change is happening. So there are those kind of legal changes that need to be made, but societal changes are really important. And awareness. But I think in many Muslim countries, there tends to be a relatively small educated elite who are aware and confident, and then a significant number of people who have huge societal pressure not to take up their rights, not to engage with formal systems of finance and other things. But I think awareness, whether it's through TV programs or social media or whatever it is, encouraging women, making them realize that this is their right, it helps their families, it's a social good. Those things can change attitudes very, very quickly. And I think there needs to be just a strong campaign right, not just across the Arab world, but basically right across the Muslim world, because I think a lot of these social norms are deeply inbuilt, and they are changing, but perhaps not quickly enough.
Coming from Saudi Arabia, the other day I was attending one of the... Okay, for that. Sure. Coming from Saudi Arabia, and particularly I was attending one of the foundation discussion about the females in Saudi Arabia and issues that happening in Saudi Arabia. And I was shocked to hear that some female and women, they have actually a bank account, but they're not aware how to invest this money, and they don't have the awareness and how to contribute in the economy. And some actually women, they don't have a bank account because they don't have a national ID yet. So this is like a small issue, but it's affecting the economy and affecting the woman and empowerment. So these issues and these awareness that should be actually discussed with women, it's particularly in older generation, because they're not aware in how to invest and how to actually have an idea and how to work and participate in the economy itself. So this will shift actually our conversation to Selma. Being in the Nahda organization, part of the Nahda organization, I'm sure that you have been facing a lot of these concerns and issues that actually affect the woman and women empowerment. If you can talk about these initiatives.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be back on stage so quickly. And I know it's already it's 5:30 and probably everybody's been tired listening to amazing conversations. I will tell you a story of the organization I work for, so kind of shift a little bit and just try to, I know Saudi is such a mystery to a lot of people, and I'll try to, through explaining what the organization I work for does, maybe it will shed some light on how Saudi is. But if I can just comment on what Farmida mentioned about needing a male's consent to open a bank account, this no longer is a law. So it changed a few years ago, actually. I am a divorced mother of 3, and I am able to do a lot of things with my kids, and my kids are happily with me. And I'm more than happy to discuss the male guardianship system after this panel, if anyone is interested. It's not a system, just as a piece of information. So I work for a nonprofit organization that's 57 years old. So it was established in the 1960s. And that was a really interesting time in Saudi because that was when women were allowed access to education. So my mother was about 10 years old, so just to put things in perspective. So we've come a really long way. The organization I work for was established in the 60s, and it's always been about women, but the way we serve women changes over time as women's needs change in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and today. I mean, as I'm sure you hear in the news, Saudi has gone through tremendous changes. Still, there's still so much more to be done, but we've come a long way for sure. The organization, for example, and I mean, until today, the highest percentage of unemployment in Saudi is in female unemployment, obviously. And if you follow the historical journey, it's not a surprise why women make up the majority of the unemployed. But at the same time, in the women, as many parts of the world, women were concentrated in the education and healthcare sectors. So the organization in the early 90s worked on pushing policy, because at the time, women were not allowed to work in factories. So we tried to push, and we were the first to kind of establish female-only areas in factories and production lines, and until we reached the point where we would consult other organizations on how, if you want to establish a women, completely segregated women-only environment, to make sure that the families feel okay with their daughters going to work, and also to address all the cultural barriers to not wanting women to participate. Throughout the years in the 90s, 2000s, we worked on different ways. How can we do, when do we push and when do we pull back, and how do we balance between doing that in an environment like Saudi Arabia? 2015, we ran a civic education campaign to try and make sure that women participate politically in municipal elections, because it was the first time women were allowed to vote and run for municipal elections. 2017, we started participating and representing civil society when the government gives its human rights reports on for the CEDA or the CRC or all of that, and that developed with time. What do we see throughout the years that what do women need, and how can we address those needs? So we work for many years until 2016. We worked on empowering women economically through training, financial support, and social support. But then we found it's not enough for women to feel empowered, because I can feel empowered and then I go home or I go to the streets and no one really feels that I'm important, or me participating in the development of the country is important. So we shifted our mission it's still about women, but the way we focus on women is a bit different. We want to ensure an environment that takes pride in women's participation, preserves women's dignity, and we know we still need to build the capacity of women. So we work in we want to see change in 3 different levels. We follow the theory of change. So women themselves, we want to develop women's sense of agency, women to feel that they have a choice. They can choose when to go to work, when to stay at home, when to study. And the laws do help women do that, but many times, because of the many years of women feeling that they can't do these things, it's still ingrained deep inside women's subconscious. So we want to see change in women themselves. Women have more agency, and then the change in the society, that the society understands why is it important for women to participate. I mean, I was so happy to come this morning to see a lot of men in the room, because it's not enough that for women to feel we're important, but we need the men also to see why is it important for women to participate. And the third level of change is change on an institutional level. We need to make sure that the policies also support and sustain these changes. So we work in 3 different scopes. Local development, where we work closely with women, mostly female, or actually all female-led households, but from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And you mentioned, what do we do about these women who are not the privileged, the ones who went and studied abroad, or the ones who have the access? We're talking about the women who make the majority of the Saudi women, who are at the very bottom, who make less than $300 net income a month. And we have a waiting list for the organization to sign up for these kind of services. So we work on local development, and then we have a research center. So this kind of feeds into so we can create projects that are based on evidence. What does the evidence say? What do we need? How can we develop our projects? And then we have an advocacy unit where this works locally to influence policy, but also on an international level through the Women 20 and the UN landscape. So this is kind of a long story, but when we work on the local development, we try to see what is it. We know the government, through the Vision 2030, wants to increase women's participation in the labor market, but we look at why are they not participating? Why are the numbers still low? So we know that a lot of it is the policies are changing, but a lot of times, someone said soft skills. I don't like that word anymore, because it's not soft. They're really important. These communication skills, these social intelligence, emotional intelligence, these are really important. Presentation skills. How do you negotiate your salary? How do you present yourself? So we develop women's abilities. We have a career education program. We have a financial literacy program to ensure that women are aware that they have rights, that they can apply for bank accounts, and they can do all these services. So that's kind of what the organization does. And we hope that because we're a non-government organization, we can push and really make sure that we make women who might not have access, make these different government-led or private services available and visible to these women.
Being part of the G20 and particularly the W20, you're heading the delegation. So what do you think in the upcoming forum in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi hope of women empowerment topics?
So I think when it comes to where we're really excited to host the Women 20 and the G20 in 2020, and I think when it comes to specifically women entrepreneurship, we're really excited because we started very early on, and I think the Japanese can tell us a word or more on how short their year was, and Saudi Arabia had the privilege of working early on and preparing early on. We are working with our colleagues in the B20, Business 20, to try and early on build consensus and collaborations on how can we ensure that also the Business 20 speaks about women in business. It's not only the women talking to themselves about women's issues. It's a cross-cutting, and how can we ensure that all these engagement groups talk about women's issues?
Yeah, that's great. Because we're almost done our time, so I want to ask all of you, what is your recommendation and how to make the MENA region actually attractive for entrepreneurs? Women entrepreneurs particularly.
I think there's got to be probably government-led initiatives to try and move the dial quickly. So, there needs to be sort of civic campaigns, and social media, around a whole host of things. I think banks and investors need targets around investing in women-led businesses, and there need to be changes on employment laws to make sure that women are treated equally in the workplace. They have equal access to employment, they're paid the same for the same work, a lot of those things which aren't always the case. I think we have the laws, for example, in the UK, and we don't achieve the a completely sort of gender parity outcome, but I think having the laws is a good starting point to get there. There are issues around, so I think women entrepreneurs have issues getting funding in the first place. They seem to worry about childcare and having the right kind of processes in place for their children to be looked after. They want to have good labour hiring regulations in place. So I think there's just a whole host of things that can be done, but there needs to be some political and social will behind it.
Haifa?
I would like to make three key recommendations for us to see more women entrepreneurs and more women as involved in the economy. Number one, investing more and more in women's capabilities and capacities. Women in the region have secured and have attained high levels of education, but we can also improve on that. We would like them to be more involved in the STEM subjects, in engineering, mathematics, and medicine and science. We would like to see women more involved in the new technologies. We're talking about the future of work. I'm proud to have been a global commissioner on the ILO Global Commission on the future of work. We just published our report marking the centenary of the ILO. So women have to be ready. The future is already with us. And that means skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and vocational training, not just university degrees. We need to look at every level of empowerment to get women to really start businesses and continue maintain them successfully. Number two, without a doubt, for entrepreneurship, for business, it is access to finance, facilitating further access to finance and digital banking, and facilitating all these things for which often for many women are daunting. Going to the bank is daunting. We need to make them all easier and accessible, and because funding is the key to put your ideas to materialize. And number three, without a doubt, advocacy. We have to the laws have to protect women's rights in business and in the right to the same salary, and the rights for earnings, as well as the right to work. And this is why when we talk about giving more the rights for women in the economy, start by giving them the full rights within society. This is where it starts. So legislation, reforming legislation is extremely important. And yes, this cannot be done by one party alone. We need, as I said in the beginning, support and collaboration between public, private sector, and civil society. It is top-down, bottom-up. But yes, I consider these three key recommendations: capacity building with a view to the future of work, to get women ready and their businesses ready, give them the funding and the support, as well as the laws to protect them and to give them an enabling environment. The laws can also create the enabling environment for men and women to do successful business, and for the private sector to flourish.
Yeah. Selma?
Thank you. I mean, I think Farmida and Haifa summed it up, and there's nothing I can add to that, except that if we can manage to turn the W20 policy recommendations into action, and we can push that would be great.
Thank you. We can open now for questions. Is there? Yes. Yeah, of course. Excuse me. Here. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Salma Abbasi. Thank you. I thought it was very informative. I have one quick question for you. In the context of creating the enabling environment and the funding and the political will, is there some light you can shed on the situation for the conflict countries where we have women, Syria in particular and Jordan, where we have a high number of refugees and women with really no support at all? Is there something in your mind that would actually help think across those lines of how to economically empower and build confidence in them? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I would like to focus on women. Of course, we have the main refugee camps in the region from Syria. They are in Jordan as well as in Lebanon. And as you are aware, Syria, by tradition, is a very rich farming country, agricultural economy. And an initiative that I'm aware of that has taken place in the Zaatari camp, which is one of the biggest camps in Jordan for refugees, for men and for women, is for them to set up small, what we call hydroponics and vertical agriculture, so they can at least start producing some food while they are in the camp, using some simple technologies, but they are within the camp able to also have small plots and produce their own food and earn money and sell the food. So this is economically empowering. Of course, also Jordan has given work permits in agreement with other, of course, multi-donors for the refugees, have given work permits for the Syrian refugees. Because again, Jordan has its own unemployment issues. As we know, it's not without that, unfortunately we do, but at least they have valued the presence of the Syrians, and they have given them, and they are welcome to work in the industries. And actually the EU came on board and the British government to say that Jordanian companies and industries who employ Syrian refugees can export their products can have entry to the EU markets. So yes, there are initiatives taking place. Yes, we need more of them, if I may say, because when I was at Harvard 2 years ago, I attended a talk. People spend now in refugee camps no less than 16, 17 years. We don't talk about 6 months. We don't talk about a year or two. That was a Harvard study. 16, 17 years, and average people spend in refugee camps. So yes, they need to make a living. Yes, they need to have livelihoods, and all these initiatives are important.
Question over here.
So yes, Ara Zaman, the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. I mean, for me, you're absolutely right to say the Prophet's wife was a businesswoman. Of course, one of the first people that she employed was the Prophet. And I wish that some of my Muslim brothers would remember that actually the Prophet worked for her initially. But I think the point I want to ask really is about responsible finance. And I think you highlighted particularly both you and all of you. But I think there is an opportunity, Salma, with the Saudi Arabia in terms of its G20, and actually maybe convening, and this is a recommendation I would like to get your reaction to, convening during your time as chair a responsible finance summit. Now, there have been many of these around the area of gender, but actually what's been missing is the link to Islamic finance. Mm-hmm. And actually, for the first time ever, the G20 is going to have a Muslim majority country as chair. At this particular moment, there's a lot of interest from non-Muslims in Islamic finance. We also know that countries like Pakistan, with the first women's bank, and Bangladesh are good, interesting examples and models in terms of women's finance. So I think when you're chair, convening a summit which joins the dots on these areas, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in London, but doing something like that would be really an innovative attempt to move the needle, to change things. I'd be interested in your response to that.
Thank you for the recommendation. I think you're first. Yeah, I have a question.
Basma Al-Qassar, founder of the Women Mentor Forum in Kuwait. We've been working on empowering women economically for 3 years now. So I've worked a lot very closely with women entrepreneurs. Now, the recommendation that I'd like to put forth is that before we talk about the technicalities and the development and the financing, there's the very essential element that we always focus on, and that is the motivation and the inspiration. And we always put forth role models, female entrepreneurs local female entrepreneurs that have made it to, we put them on stage, we have them speak, and we tell them to talk about their story. And this is the first spark. And then we can come in with the development, and we can come in with the finance and the opportunities. So this is something very essential. And coming from Kuwait, which is, yes, it is a very rich country, but no, we don't have many female entrepreneurs because we don't have a lot of female role model entrepreneurs. So we start with that. And I think that is a formula that works across globally. And then we come into, I said, the development skills. There's an issue also in the Arab world, and I could speak for the GCC specifically, is the networking. So there's that issue of networking, and this is where we have created these forums and networking opportunities for women as an alternative to what is known as the Diwania, which is the social space which is male only, and women are not allowed. And that is where men make the decisions on policies, on economics, on financing, business, and politics, and women are excluded from that. So an alternative for women, because women will not enter the Diwania, and we have to be honest with ourselves. No, we will not, it will not change. It's something, it's a cultural establishment, and instead of changing the cultural establishment or saying, no, this is not right, you have to have women enter, we need to create alternative forums, platforms, networking opportunities locally in every area for women to meet, to learn, and to find mentors that could help them and support themselves, which is also helpful to find business connections. And of course, it also leads to political connections as well. So these are just, from experience, I wanted to put that forth.
Thank you for your recommendation.
Thanks. My name is Dorothy Gordon, and it just happens that 2 weeks ago I was in Beirut for the Arab Innovation Awards. And I think that Lebanon is very focused on becoming a digital hub. What I have noticed is when it comes to the study of computer science, we see that the Arab world actually does better than many other countries. For example, the UK. If you look at the proportion of women in studying computer science in UAE, in the classroom, it's higher than in the UK. So I think there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to digital. And one of the winners of the award was a Syrian coming out of Damascus with a wonderful project. So I think that having special focus on digital business is important. I wanted to remind us that the head of ESQA is a woman, a Kuwaiti woman, and so that it opens up a lot of opportunities as well. And the question, because I get upset as an African when they talk about Africa, because we have 53 or 54 countries depending on who you're talking to. 22 countries, you have some leaders and you have some laggards. And I believe that it is within the region that you will find the peers who will be able to achieve the influence and pull the others up. When they see the economy of this country is moving because of these innovations, then everybody will follow. So my question is, who are the leaders?
Honestly, our region now, women are the untapped resource. Let me put it this way, and they are. Tunisia has always been the first, really. Okay. Tunisia has always been the first, and why? Because simply when the country won independence from France in 1956, the founder, President Bourguiba, put women's rights in the constitution from day one. He knew he had a poor country. He knew that he did not have much resources. Tunisia has the coastal strip of agriculture, does not have much oil. It has Libya, it has Algeria, full of oil. Tunisia doesn't have, it has the human resource. He wanted to invest in his people. So Tunisian women are the most empowered because their rights, nobody can take their rights away. And when after Bourguiba came Ben Ali, president after him, he actually even added to women's rights. And they created a ministry for women to follow up on the recommendations and on the laws that they are implemented. So we don't have just the laws, that they are being implemented. So truly, then came the Arab Spring, and they were talking about perhaps nobody can put women back in Tunisia at all. They are everywhere. They're in the farm, they're in the plane, they're in the army, they are gendarmes, they are everywhere. So Tunisia is by far the most empowered environment, because from the beginning it's the law, the law, the law. And they are very, very, very, very strong. But you have many other countries. Now in the Gulf states, we're really all impressed, all of us who come from the MENA. I come from the MENA. The roots of my family come from Palestine. I know Lebanon, and I'm married to Jordanian. So my region is the MENA. But we look at our sisters in the Gulf and really with admiration, not only for what they are achieving, but what the governments, the enlightened governments, but again, small populations, they're focusing on their human resource, they're using the natural wealth that God has blessed these countries with, oil and natural gas, and they are investing in their people. Not only education, they're giving them jobs, they're putting their rights in the law, they're putting them in the parliaments, in the shura councils, women ambassadors, Arab from the UAE, from Saudi, all over the world. So and even the workforce for women participation, the rates in the Gulf states, some countries have reached 40%. So they are above the average that we have in the MENA. Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia is coming, Bahrain, the UAE. And I remember our members in the UAE always tell us that they are the luckiest of women, because really they have a very empowering environment, not by words, by deeds. This is what matters. Yeah.
Last two questions. We have a question here. Yes.
Helen Walby, Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I promise my question is going to be lightning quick, as they generally are. I accept the fact that you're not regulatory specialists, but you've been talking about women's access to finance and the significant impact that being a refugee has. So is there a place for tiered know your customer requirements, meaning that for people who have limited access to ID, they can access more basic financial services with much less ID than would be required for a traditional bank account? And is this something that regulators should be looking at in the Gulf to develop more products so more women at the bottom of the pyramid can access finance?
For refugees in the Gulf, isn't it? Yeah. So I don't think that the problem is the presence of refugees in the Gulf. The problem is historical, very, very traditional societies where women didn't really interact with the world outside their families, so they didn't need that kind of formal identification. I think the issues with refugees who are in camps in Jordan, in Lebanon and elsewhere are different, and I think they're, I'm not sure how many of them are able to access bank accounts, but that's just a different issue to society catching up on how quickly things are developing in the Gulf, where it's generational, I think.
Last question.
Just a very last question, and actually following up on that. And every time I read about Islamic financing, you're the expert, I am not. There's so many opportunities for Islamic financing, and there's this massive frustration because, in Islamic financing, everything's possible until it's not. And so I'm wondering, in the refugee setting, I mean, we work with women entrepreneurs who go into refugee settings because the reality with Lebanon and Jordan, particularly where we are, is it's not really fair of a host country when they don't actually enable those environments as much as they should, because they've got their own problems and there's a huge amount of pressure. With Islamic financing, is there a way to engage with those refugee communities to give them access to livelihoods or provide something?
Yes, I mean, I think.
Why is that not happening?
Well, Islamic Aid is, I guess, like any other charity, isn't it? But I don't know why it's not happening, but I think the starting point really is whatever happens conventionally in terms of aid, support, starting businesses should be doable in a Sharia compliant way. So then there is a question of will and, you know, who needs this to be done in a Sharia compliant way? Is it the donors? Is it the recipients? Are those people just in a state where they'll take help from wherever it comes, and what kind of help are we talking about? So I think your comment about the G20 next year looking at sustainable development from a Sharia compliant perspective is overdue. I think there needs to be pressure put on the Islamic finance industry to engage with some of its core principles. It's very good at talking about being about societal good and about sharing risks and, you know, a lot of that stuff. As you say, one doesn't see a lot of it in action, and there should be some pressure, and especially with the way the world is at the moment, where a lot of the hotspots are in Muslim majority countries. There is no reason why Islamic finance cannot be used to support those people, but you have to find the sources of funding which would go in and which need to be done in a Sharia compliant way.
If I may add one point to that also to support you.
Just collateral. Refugees don't have collateral. That's what we're facing in Bangladesh.
So they don't have
collateral, the security part.
Collateral.
There is this concept of necessity. Necessity trumps everything. So if you look at, for example, the Gavi Sukuk that was issued a few years back for vaccinations, Gavi turned around and said, we can't do a conventional Sukuk which requires collateral. We're just going to do a Murabaha-based Sukuk. And the broader good here overrides the structural problems. There wasn't a squeak of protest because everybody accepted that the broader good was what overrode the structuring needs. And I think, you know, if one was looking to support the Rohingya refugees, I don't think structuring challenges is the thing that would hold back help. I think a willingness to provide it is the issue.
Thank you, everyone. Let me thank all the panelists for a wonderful discussion.